At my mom's birthday, my stepdad handed me a paper plate and said, "The help eats outside." The entire room burst out laughing. My mom said nothing. I turned to walk away. Then my aunt walked in, looked around the room and said, "So, nobody told them yet?" Everyone went silent. At my mother's 60th birthday, my stepfather handed me a paper plate and said, "The help eats outside." For half a second, nobody moved. Then my cousin Kyle laughed. My stepbrother snorted into his beer. Two neighbors from down the shore turned away to hide their smiles, which is the polite way of laughing at someone. My mother stood beside her cake, holding a crystal glass. She said nothing. I looked down at the plate. White. The cheap kind that goes soft under a slice of lasagna. Somebody had bought a stack for the kids' table, and Gary had peeled one off the top for me. I had been at the lake house since 7 that morning, moving tables, fixing the broken patio light, hauling trays from the caterer's van because Mom had called the night before in a panic. There was grease on the cuff of my good shirt from the light fixture, and I hadn't noticed until that moment, looking down at the plate. That was the problem with being useful in my family. Sooner or later, useful was all you were. Gary Mercer had spent 12 years introducing me as the practical one. That was his polite way of saying I wasn't impressive. His son Brandon was the entrepreneur. I was the one you called when the water heater went. I owned a commercial maintenance company with 23 employees. We held service contracts for 2 hospital systems, outpatient clinics, a school district, and a regional bank's branches, but I wore work boots and could fix a leaking pipe. And to Gary, that made me the woman you hired to clean up after the real family. "Come on, Claire," he said, waving toward the side gate. "Don't make it awkward." The laughter started again. Lighter this time, the way people laugh when they've decided something is a joke because the alternative is uncomfortable. I looked at Mom. I waited for her to say, "She's my daughter." She lowered her eyes. Something inside me went completely quiet. Not angry, quiet. The way a building goes quiet when the main breaker trips and every hum you'd stopped hearing stops at once. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said. I set the plate on the table and picked up my purse. I had almost reached the patio doors when a voice cut through the room. "So, nobody told them yet?" My Aunt Rebecca stood in the doorway holding a leather document case. "Before I tell you what was in it, you need to understand how I ended up holding a paper plate in my grandmother's house. My grandfather, Walt Keene, bought the land on Mill Lake in 1978 for less than a used pickup costs now. 5 acres of pine and clay on the north shore, no road in. He built the house over 6 summers with my grandmother Rose, holding the other end of every board. In 1994, when they bought a 1-story brick medical building across town as a retirement investment, he put both properties into an LLC and named it Rosewood Holdings, Rose and the Woods. He was not a creative man, he was a careful one. I learned to sweat copper pipe in that house when I was 11. My father had left when I was 9 and stayed gone, and my mother handled that by working doubles and handing me to her parents every weekend. Grandpa Walt didn't know how to talk to a sad kid. He knew how to show her where the shutoff valve was and let her turn it. By 26, I had a contractor's license and a truck with my name on the door, Donnelly Facility Services. I'm still the one who answers the phone at 2 in the morning when a clinic's sump pump quits. Grandpa Walt passed 13 years ago. Mom married Gary Mercer a year later. Gary had run the sales floor at a Chevrolet dealership for 22 years and retired with a gold watch, a story he told at every holiday as though it were a medal. He called himself a consultant. He was funny, actually funny, the kind of man who could make a room of strangers feel like his guests inside 10 minutes, and he had decided early that the easiest laugh in any room was me. Brandon, his son, was 34 and owned Mercer Performance Motors, an independent used car lot on Route 9 with a 30-foot sign Gary had helped pay for. Nobody was supposed to mention that the lot had changed floor plan lenders twice in 3 years. Grandma Rose got sick in the fall, heart failure, the slow kind. Mom visited when she could. Gary visited when there was a crowd to visit with. I went every Saturday. I'm not saying that to be admired. I'm saying it because it became the central fact of a lawsuit. Doctor visits, groceries, the furnace igniter, the gutters, the pill organizer, the evenings she didn't want to talk and just wanted someone in the next room running a drill. 71 Saturdays. I know the number because my company's work order system logs every job I clock into, including the ones I never bill. And a year and a half later, a forensic document examiner would thank me for that habit in a way that still turns my stomach. I never asked what she planned to leave me. I assumed, like everyone, that it would all go to Mom. The difference between me and everyone else was that I didn't care. Grandma Rose passed away on a Tuesday in May. 2 days later, Aunt Rebecca, her older daughter and the executor, read the will at the lake house kitchen table because that's how Rose had wanted it done. Mom got $180,000 in cash and lifetime income from a brokerage account. I got Rosewood Holdings, the house, the 5 acres, the building across town. There was a letter, notarized, explaining why. Rebecca didn't read it that day. Rose had asked her to hold it until the estate closed. Gary laughed first, then he stopped laughing. Within a month, there was a petition in probate court contesting the will for undue influence. On paper, it was Mom's petition. Gary found the lawyer, Gary paid the retainer, and Gary sat in the front row of every hearing with his arm across the back of Mom's chair. The theory was that I had spent 71 Saturdays isolating a sick woman from her family and steering her pen. He told the relatives I was stealing my own mother's inheritance. He told the neighbors. He told the man at the marina. By Christmas, half the people who'd known me since I was 11 couldn't quite meet my eye. The estate's attorney was Margaret Oyalaran, 26 26 years in probate and trust litigation, a woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke so slowly in hearings that opposing counsel tended to fill the silences with mistakes. She told me undue influence cases were won on documentation, not feelings. Bring me everything, she said. If you fixed a toilet, I want the work order. I brought her a banker's box. Probate should have taken 4 months. It took 18. And in those 18 months, while I was defending myself against the accusation that I'd been scheming over my grandmother's property, my stepfather was actually doing it. The first thing I noticed was the flagging. 8 months into probate, in January, Rebecca asked me to winterize the lake house, since it sat mostly empty in the cold, and I was, in her words, the only person in the family who knew which pipe froze first. I pulled in at 8:15 on a Saturday and saw a pink survey ribbon on a lath stake at the corner of the drive, then another at the tree line. 4 total. At the property corners, the wood still pale. I told myself it was the county. Assessor's resurvey. Probate triggers a reappraisal. Routine. Except county crews use orange, and they don't leave a metal tag reading Harlan and Voss Land, surveying with a job number. I called Monday. The receptionist was cheerful. The job had been ordered by the property owner, Mr. Mercer. My hands were fine. It was my neck that went hot, a flush up the back of it like I'd stood too close to a furnace. I called Rebecca. Rebecca called Margaret. Margaret sent a 2-paragraph letter reminding Mr. Mercer that the property was an estate asset under the executor's control. Gary called me that night, pleasant as a car commercial. It's for the appraisal, Claire. Linda's attorney needs a current survey for the valuation. You want the estate undervalued? Relax. That was almost reasonable. The appraisal did need a survey, so I relaxed, or performed relaxing, which in my family had always been close enough. In May, Dr. Anjali Patel called my cell. Dr. Patel had run Lakeview Family Medicine out of the Rosewood building for 11 years. My company held the maintenance contract. Grandma had hired us when I was still working out of my garage and never once let me discount the invoice. So Dr. Patel had my number, and she used it, apologetically, on a Wednesday afternoon. A man came by this morning. Gary? He said he was family. He had a woman with him with a tablet and a lanyard from some development company. They walked the parking lot and asked when my lease ends. What did you tell him? That my lease is with Rosewood Holdings and he should ask Rosewood Holdings. A pause. Claire, who is Rosewood Holdings right now? I didn't have a clean answer. The honest one was, a woman in probate court with a banker's box. I told myself developers cold call every corner lot. Gary was probably just there to look important in front of a stranger. Then I asked Mom about it at Sunday dinner, and she didn't look surprised. She looked rehearsed. He's just planning ahead, honey. Somebody has to. The phrase wasn't hers. Mom didn't say somebody has to. Gary said somebody has to, usually right before he did something nobody had asked for. I drove home with the radio off, thinking about the word planning. You don't plan around property you don't own, unless you've already decided you do. In August, I went looking for the Rosewood binder, and it wasn't there. Grandpa Walt had kept the LLC's whole life in a green 3-ring binder in the bottom drawer of the steel filing cabinet in the Lake House office. Articles of organization, the IRS letter with the EIN, the bank signature cards, a sleeve of letterhead, Rosewood Holdings across the top in the dark green he'd picked in 1994. Rebecca needed the articles for a filing and asked me to grab them, since I had a key and she had a new knee. The drawer was empty, not rifled, empty. Somebody had taken the binder and closed the drawer neatly behind them. I told myself Rebecca had it. She was the executor. Executors take corporate records. She hadn't been inside the house since March. Mom and Gary had. The lake house was family, Gary said, and family used it on weekends, probate or no probate, and nobody had wanted the fight. Margaret sent another letter. This one had the word demand in it. A week later, Gary gave the binder to Mom, who handed it to me in a Target bag in her driveway without getting out of her car. He was organizing it for me, she said. For after. I photographed every page that night at my kitchen table, the way I'd photograph a job site before and after. The articles were there, the EIN letter was there, the bank signature cards were gone, and the sleeve of letterhead was thin. I didn't know how many sheets Grandpa Walt had left in it. I knew it had been thicker. Paper goes missing. I run a company. Paper goes missing every day. I logged the photos with timestamps anyway, and told Margaret, and went back to sleeping 4 hours a night. In late September, Dr. Patel forwarded me a PDF, 1 page, Rosewood Holdings letterhead, dark green, notice of non-renewal. It informed Lakeview Family Medicine that the premises were to be delivered vacant no later than December 31st. It was signed Gary Mercer on behalf of Rosewood Holdings. On behalf of. I read it standing in a mechanical room on the other side of the county, one hand on a boiler, and I had to set the phone on top of the unit because I couldn't hold it steady enough to read the second paragraph. That was the first time I couldn't rationalize. There is no version of planning ahead that includes evicting a medical practice from a building you don't own. On letterhead you took out of my grandmother's filing cabinet. Margaret filed an emergency motion the next morning. Judge Harold Brennan, who had presided over the will contest for 15 months, signed an order within the week. Gary Mercer was to cease all contact with estate tenants, vendors, and counterparties, and the notice was void. Dr. Patel stayed. She also, quietly, started touring other office space because she had 14 employees, and a judge's order is not a lease. Gary's response was to tell the family I was harassing Linda through lawyers. 2 cousins stopped answering my texts. A neighbor stopped me at the marina and asked, not unkindly, whether it was true I'd tried tried to throw my own mother out of the lake house. The will contest hearing came in early October. Margaret put my banker's box into evidence, work order by work order, Rebecca testified. Grandma's cardiologist testified by deposition that Rose had been lucid and specific about her wishes. The will itself had been signed 6 months before her diagnosis, a fact Margaret made a point of saying slowly. Mom testified that she didn't really know what her mother wanted and cried, and Gary handed her tissues from the front row. Judge Brennan took it under advisement. Then we waited 6 weeks. It could have gone either way. Mom called at 9:40 the night before her birthday, close to tears, because the caterer was short-staffed and the patio light had been out for a month and Gary had a lot on his plate. Could I come early? I was there at 7:04 a.m. I know the minute because I clock into my own truck. I moved 11 folding tables. I replaced the ballast in the patio light and cleaned a wasp nest out of the fixture. I hauled trays. At 10:30, Brandon pulled in behind the caterer's van in a white Silverado with a paper dealer plate on the phone. Loud, the way he always was on the phone. He didn't see me on the ladder. It cleared Tuesday. He was saying, "We're good through January. I told you." He handled it. A car deal, I assumed. Brandon talked about money clearing the way other people talk about weather. Gary came out a little after that, saw me on the ladder, and did something he hadn't done in 12 years. He thanked me warmly. He held the ladder while I came down, said, "You're a good kid, Claire," and squeezed my shoulder. It should have been the loudest alarm of the whole 18 months. I thought he was being nice because it was her birthday. By 6, the house was full. By 7, he'd handed me the plate. So that was where we were when Rebecca stood in the doorway and asked the question nobody had an answer to. She was Mom's older sister and the executor of my grandmother's estate. It had been stuck in probate for 18 months because Gary had challenged the will. Every face turned. Rebecca looked at Mom, then Gary, then me. She had driven straight from the courthouse without changing out of her hearing blazer, and she had the look of a woman who'd spent 40 minutes in the car deciding whether to do this in private. "The judge signed the final order at 2:40 this afternoon," she said. "Claire, the lake house and Rosewood Holdings are officially yours." Gary stopped smiling. Mom gripped the edge of the cake table. Rosewood Holdings owned this house, the 5 acres around it, and the commercial building across town. As of 2:40 that afternoon, the man who just sent me out the side gate was standing in my living room. Gary's face went pale. "That's impossible." Rebecca opened the case. "No," she said. "What's impossible is the sale contract you signed yesterday for property you never owned." "What sale contract?" She set a stapled packet down beside the birthday cake. "The buyer was Northbridge Development. The price was $146 million. Closing date, January 8th. The house, the land, the building Rosewood rented to a medical practice." Gary had already taken a $75,000 deposit. He had promised the buyer the property would be delivered vacant, which explained the notice on Dr. Patel's desk, and the stakes in the frozen ground, and the woman with the lanyard in the parking lot. My name was nowhere on it. "You knew probate wasn't finished," Rebecca said. Gary's jaw tightened. "Linda was Rose's daughter. Everybody knew the property would go to her." "No," I said. "Everybody assumed. Grandma Rose changed her will 2 years before she passed. I spent nearly every Saturday of her last 18 months with her. Doctor visits, groceries, repairs, sitting with her when she needed company. I never asked what she planned to leave me." Gary told everyone I had manipulated her. He challenged the will and told the relatives I was stealing my own mother's inheritance. That was why half this room already thought the worst of me. I watched them realize it. Kyle, who'd laughed first, was studying the carpet. Rebecca slid out another page. Grandma had left Mom $180,000 in cash, plus lifetime income from a separate account. She left Rosewood to me. Her notarized letter said why. Rebecca read one line of it aloud, and it was the first time any of us had heard it. "Claire protects what everyone else assumes will protect itself." Mom started to cry. Gary didn't look at her. He was still staring at the contract, doing the math men like Gary do. The math about what a room knows and what it can be made to forget by Thanksgiving. Linda signed too. The room changed. I turned to my mother. "Mom," she whispered, "he said the judge would rule for us." Rebecca's expression hardened. "You signed a contract selling assets still controlled by the estate." Mom covered her face. Gary snapped. "Fine. Claire can sign now. She gets her money. We all move on." I almost laughed. "You sold my grandmother's home yesterday, humiliated me in it today, and now you want my signature?" His voice rose. "This family has carried you long enough." Rebecca reached into the case again. "No, Gary, there's one more problem." She set a bank record in front of him. Stapled behind it was a 1-page approval form with Rosewood Holdings printed across the top. Dark green. The same green. The $75,000 deposit had landed Monday. By Tuesday morning, $61,800 of it was gone. Wired to Mercer Performance Motors, the failing dealership owned by Gary's son. My stepbrother wasn't laughing anymore. "It cleared Tuesday. We're good through January." He handled it. Then Rebecca looked at my mother. "Linda," she said quietly, "tell Claire whose signature authorized that transfer." Mom's lips trembled. She looked at me. "Yours." I had never signed anything for Gary Mercer in my life, and on the witness line, in neat blue ink, was my mother's name. Nobody laughed. Gary said something to Rebecca about slander and what she could expect Monday morning. Rebecca closed the case and said, "I'd get your own lawyer, Gary. Linda's going to need hers." Brandon left through the side gate, which I noticed. Mom stayed by the cake and didn't look up. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out the patio doors I'd been heading for before the room went quiet and sat in my truck in the dark for 11 minutes before I trusted my hands on the wheel. On the drive home, I pulled over for twice. Not to cry, to breathe. My chest had gone tight in a way that made me think, very practically, about whether I was having a cardiac event at 38. And then I remembered that practical was the whole problem, and I laughed at that, alone, on the shoulder of Route 9, across from the Mercer Performance Motors sign with half its letters unlit. Rebecca called at 11:20 p.m. and told me the rest. Northbridge had signed a letter of intent with Gary 2 weeks earlier, with a $75,000 good faith deposit wired directly to the seller. Northbridge's idea of speed, Gary's idea of a windfall. The formal contract had followed Thursday. The money had gone into an account Gary opened November 3rd at Harbor Point Community Bank in the name of Rosewood Holdings LLC, using copies of the Articles of Organization, the EIN letter, and a one-page member resolution naming him sole signer. $75,000 in on Monday and $61,800 out on Tuesday on a 2-week-old account is the kind of thing bank compliance departments are paid to notice. They checked the state's business registry. The registered agent of record had been updated that spring to the executor of the Keene estate. They called Rebecca to verify. She said, "I never authorized an account." They froze what was left and sent her, as the verified authority with letters testamentary, everything Gary had handed them. That was Wednesday. Thursday evening, the title company called her about a purchase agreement for property vested in an estate. "I was going to wait until Monday," Rebecca said. "Handle it quietly. Then I walked in and saw you holding that plate." She was quiet a moment. "Rose wrote that letter 3 years ago, Claire. I think she knew exactly what it would take for someone to read it out loud. Margaret Oyalaran met me at her office at 8 war Saturday morning in jeans, which I hadn't known she owned. She walked me through it the way she walked judges through it. The purchase agreement wasn't voidable. It was void. The seller had no title to convey. Northbridge's remedy was against the people who signed it, not against the property. She would record the final order Monday and send a copy to the title company, and the Elias Pendens Northbridge's lawyers would almost certainly file would come off once a judge looked at it. The estate's own appraisal, the one Gary's survey had supposedly been for, had come back at $2.06 million. He'd sold it for $1.46 million because men who need $61,000 by Wednesday don't negotiate. That's the civil side. I can handle the civil side. The other side I can't, and you need to hear this clearly. A document exists with your signature authorizing the movement of $61,000. If you didn't sign it, that's forgery, identity theft, and it is not a family matter. It's a crime with your name on it. You report it or you own it. I asked what own it meant. It means if you do nothing, the paper says you did this. And the man who made the paper knows that. She took off her glasses. He used your name because the will said your name. If anyone at the bank pulled the probate file, the member on the resolution matched. And if the judge ruled for you, the paper would say you'd authorized all of it. He built it to work either way. She gave me 2 names. Detective Maria Castellano had 19 years with the county sheriff's office, 11 in financial crimes, and a desk that looked like mine. 3 monitors, a legal pad, a coffee cup from a place that had closed. She listened to the whole thing without writing anything down, which I learned later was how she decided whether to write anything down. When I finished, she said, "Ms. Donnelly, I'll be honest with you. 9 out of 10 of these that cross my desk are a family fight dressed up as a crime. Somebody's mad at their stepdad. They find a piece of paper. They want me to arrest him." She tapped the bank printout. "This is a piece of paper." "It's 2, I said, and slid over the account opening resolution Rebecca had sent me. My signature was on that one too, authorizing Gary Mercer as sole signer on an account I'd never heard of. She looked at it a long time. "Okay," she said. "Now I'm writing." She told me what she needed, a sworn affidavit of forgery, known exemplars of my signature, as many as I could produce, with dates. An examiner's report would help, but the affidavit came first, because without a victim's sworn statement, the DA wouldn't open a file, and the bank wouldn't hold the funds past its administrative window. How long is the window? 10 business days from the freeze. You've got until the 5th. Then she said the thing I had been not thinking about since 11:20 the night before. "You understand the witness line." I said I did. "I want to make sure. If you swear that isn't your signature, then your mother, in ink, swore it was. She witnessed an act that didn't happen. Whether that makes her a co-conspirator or a foolish woman depends on what she knew, and I don't decide which. Once you sign, I have to ask her." Dale Whitcomb had spent 22 years as a questioned documents examiner, 14 of them at the state crime lab, before going private. His office was a converted dentist's suite, and his light table hummed. I gave him 31 exemplars. That was the part I hadn't expected to matter. My work order software stores a signed PDF of every proposal and every completed job, stamped to the minute, going back 9 years. I printed everyone from the last 3. Then I gave him the 2 questioned signatures. His report was 19 pages. He walked me through it on the 5th day. "Your natural signature is fast. The C is 1 stroke with a tapered entry. The L in Donnelly is a loop that never closes. On both questioned signatures, the entry stroke on the C is blunt. That's a pen touching down and then deciding to move. There are pen lifts at 2 points where you don't lift. There's tremor in the long strokes, which is what a hand does when it's going slowly and trying to look like it isn't. This is a simulation." Then he put a 3rd sheet under the light. "And the proportions. Both questioned signatures match, within a millimeter, 1 specific exemplar. Your proposal dated March 14th for the parking lot resurfacing at the Rosewood building. They weren't imitating your signature. They were tracing that one. March 14th. I'd written that proposal at Grandma's request the spring before she got sick, and she'd filed her copy with the rosewood papers, in the green binder, in the bottom drawer of the cabinet Gary emptied. I asked if he'd testify. I testify about ink, he said. This ink is about as clear as ink gets. Thanksgiving happened somewhere in there. I worked. There was a fourth professional that week, and he didn't work for me. Philip Rourke, counsel for Northbridge Development, sent a letter by courier on Wednesday. Northbridge had relied in good faith on representations by Linda Mercer, an heir, and Gary Mercer, acting with apparent authority. Northbridge had relied on a Rosewood Holdings member resolution, bearing the signature of Claire Donnelly. Northbridge was prepared to proceed to closing on January 8th, with the new owner substituted as seller, the $75,000 applied to the price. Alternatively, Northbridge would pursue all remedies against all parties, including anyone who had ratified or benefited from the resolution. Attached was a notice of lis pendens recorded that morning. Also attached under a different lawyer's cover sheet was a one-page document titled Ratification and Authorization, prepared for my signature. It said that I, Claire Donnelly, as sole member of Rosewood Holdings, ratified the resolution dated November 3rd and the transfer dated November 18th, and authorized the sale to proceed. The different lawyer was Gary's. Mom called Thursday night, not from her cell. From the landline at the house she shared with Gary, which meant he was in the room. I could hear the television. I could hear him not talking. Claire. Her voice had the thin, careful sound of someone reading a script she hated. Gary's lawyer says if you sign the ratification, everything stops. Northbridge keeps the deal. You get the money. Nobody has to be charged with anything. Mom, if you sign the affidavit, his lawyer says the detective has to come talk to me. I witnessed it, Claire. I'm the one who signed as the witness. Do you understand what that means for me? I understood exactly what it meant. So did Gary. That was the point of the call. Did you see me sign it? I asked. Silence. The television. Then, so quietly, I almost missed it. He said you had. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher for a long time after she hung up. Here is what the week looked like from the floor. Northbridge's lis pendens was on the property. Dr. Patel had called that afternoon to say, with real regret, that she had a lease offer on a building across from the hospital and had to answer by December 15th. The bank's hold ran out on the 5th. Castellano needed the affidavit by the 5th, or the DA wouldn't open a file, and the remaining $13,200 would release to the signer of record, who was Gary. The $61,800 was already inside a dealership that owed more than that to its lender. Margaret could get the lis pendens off eventually. Eventually was not December 15th, and the only document in the world that made all of it stop was the one that said I'd done it. If I signed the ratification, I'd be confirming under my own hand that I'd authorized a man to move my grandmother's money into my stepbrother's failing business and sell her house for $600,000 less than it was worth. I'd be making the forgery true. Mom would be safe, Gary would be right, and every relative who'd laughed at the paper plate would go home and say, see, she signed? It was always a family deal. If I signed the affidavit, my mother would be interviewed by a financial crimes detective about a felony she'd put her name to. I had one day. I didn't sleep, I didn't eat. I know that's what people say. I mean, I put toast in my mouth at 6 a.m. and had to spit it into the sink. I drove to a clinic and stood in front of an air handler for 20 minutes without touching it until my foreman asked if I was okay, and I said yes in a voice neither of us believed. At noon, I called Rebecca and asked what Grandma would have wanted me to do. I knew it was a stupid question. I asked it anyway. Rebecca didn't answer for a while. Rose didn't leave you the house because you'd keep quiet, Claire. She left it to you because you wouldn't. Then I did two things. First, I called Margaret and asked for the best criminal defense attorney she knew who had never heard of Gary Mercer. She gave me Dana Whitfield, 15 years, 9 as a public defender, who did not take referrals from a co-defendant's lawyer. I paid her retainer over the phone on my business card. I asked her to call my mother directly that afternoon on her cell and say one thing, that she represented Linda and no one else, and that Linda should not speak to Gary's lawyer again until she'd spoken to her. It was the only protection I could give my mother that didn't require me to lie. Second, at 4:52 p.m. on Friday, December 5th, in front of a notary at Margaret's office, I swore under penalty of perjury that the signatures on the November 3rd resolution and the November 18th authorization were not mine, that I had not authorized either act, and that I had never signed any document for or at the request of Gary Mercer. Castellano picked it up at 5:15. Then I went home and sat in my truck in my own driveway and waited for my mother to never speak to me again. She didn't call that weekend. Monday morning, Dana Whitfield called instead to say only that she had a client, and the client had come in on her own. That was all she could tell me. It was enough. Here is what came out over the next 5 weeks, in the order it came out, because the order matters. Mom's proffer came first. With her own lawyer beside her, she told Detective Castellano that on the evening of November 17th, Gary had put a one-page form on the kitchen table with my signature already on it, said I'd signed it at the lake house that Sunday, and called it a formality for the bank. She knew I hadn't been at the lake house that Sunday. She signed the witness line anyway, because he told her the ruling was days away, and the money would be theirs regardless. And because, she said, she was tired of being the only one in the room who hadn't decided what she believed. She hadn't known about the account. She hadn't known about the survey. She had signed the Northbridge contract because he put it in front of her. She did know by then that I had never signed anything for Gary Mercer. She had told herself it didn't matter. matter. Her statement was the probable cause Castellano needed. The warrant was executed on the Home Office at 7:30 a.m. on December 11th. On Gary's laptop, in a folder named Rosewood, was a scan of my March 14th proposal, created in August, 3 days before the binder came back to me in a Target bag. Next to it was a cropped PNG of my signature alone, created October 29th, and 3 drafts of the member resolution with the signature pasted at slightly different sizes. On his phone were the texts with Brandon. The floor plan lender had audited the lot in October and found 6 vehicles sold out of trust. Brandon had until November 19th to cure $61,800 or lose the line, and Gary had personally guaranteed it. Money's moving Tuesday. One text read, "Don't say anything at the party." And the night before Mom's birthday, Judge rules Monday. After that, it's Linda's, and nobody looks. The judge had ruled Friday instead, 4 hours before the cake. Harbor Point's branch video showed Gary alone at a new account's desk at 11:14 a.m. on November 3rd, sliding the resolution across. The banker's notes said he'd been very friendly. Assistant District Attorney Nathan Brooks, 12 years in financial crimes, had told me in our first meeting that juries don't love family cases. He looked at Whitcomb's report, the PNG file, the texts, the video, and my mother's statement, and decided he loved this one fine. Charges were filed January 6th. 2 counts of forgery, 1 count of identity theft, 1 count of theft by unauthorized transfer, 1 count of attempted theft by deception for the $146 million, which Brooks told me he'd included mostly because he wanted it read aloud. Gary Mercer was arraigned January 8th, the day he'd promised Northbridge the keys. He pleaded not guilty, then changed his mind in March, when Whitcomb's report was admitted and his own lawyer looked at the PNG's creation date and asked for a recess. He pleaded to both forgery counts and the identity theft. 8 months in the county jail, 5 years of probation, $61,800 in restitution to Rosewood Holdings, a permanent bar from acting as a signer, officer, or fiduciary of any entity in the state. Northbridge sued him personally for its deposit and won in June. Philip Rourke withdrew the Elias pendants the week charges were filed, having apparently decided which side of the caption he wanted to be on, and sent me a 1-line letter that said, "Northbridge regrets the inconvenience." I've kept it. It's the most expensive sentence anyone has ever written to me. Brandon wasn't charged. He was deposed for 4 hours about what he'd known. The lender pulled the line in February and cleared the lot on a Tuesday morning. 11 trucks, 3 at a time on a flatbed, while I drove past on my way to a job. The sign came down in April. The letters were already half out. The bank released the frozen $13,200 to Rosewood. The rest is a restitution order against a man who no longer has a house, because the one he and Mom owned together was sold in the divorce, and most of his half went to Northbridge. Mom entered a deferred prosecution agreement on a single misdemeanor count of false statement in a financial instrument, 2 years of probation, cooperation, restitution, jointly, which I have never once tried to collect from her. Her name is on the witness line of a felony and will be for the rest of her life, and she knows it. She filed for divorce 2 weeks after her proffer, from the office of a lawyer I paid for, and she has never thanked me for, which is, I've come to understand, exactly correct. That was the expected part. Here's the part I didn't expect. Kyle texted me 3 weeks after the arraignment. 2 sentences. The second one was sorry. The neighbors from down the shore sent a card. One of the cousins who'd stopped answering my texts called and talked for 40 minutes about everything except the reason she was calling, which is how my family apologizes, and I let her. Dr. Patel turned down the building across from the hospital on December 12th, the day after the warrant, when Margaret sent her the recorded order and I sent her a 10-year lease at a rate Margaret called below market, and I called exactly right. She told me later she'd decided the week before, watching me reseal her boiler door at 7 in the morning in the middle of all of it without mentioning any of it. People who are about to lose a building, she said, don't fix the boiler. I resurfaced the parking lot in May. I didn't bill Rosewood. It turns out I'd already written the proposal. It's been a year. The lake house is quiet the way Grandpa Walt built it to be. I redid the patio light properly in the spring, new fixture, new wiring, because the ballast I'd swapped the morning of the party was a patch, and I don't leave patches in my own house. I eat on that patio most nights in summer. Nobody sends me there. I go. Mom comes on Saturdays. I want to be careful about how I say that, because the version of this story where everything is healed and my mother and I hold hands on the dock isn't true, and I promised myself I'd only tell you true things. She comes on Saturdays. She brings groceries, mostly things I don't need. She stays a few hours. We talk about the dock and the weather and her apartment, and almost never about the plate. Sometimes she starts to, and I let her not. She turned 61 here in the kitchen with Rebecca and me and a grocery store cake and real plates. She cried a little. Nobody laughed. I don't know if we get all the way back. I know she's trying, and I know what it cost her to walk into Dana Whitfield's office alone that Monday. And I know that for 71 Saturdays, I sat with a woman who couldn't do anything for me, and it turned out to be the most important thing I ever did. So I sit on Saturdays. It's what I know how to do. Grandma's letter is in the top drawer of the steel filing cabinet in the office, the one Gary emptied. I put it back there myself. It's the only thing in the drawer. Every so often, I open it and read the line Rebecca read aloud to a room full of people who had just finished laughing at me, and I think about how long my grandmother must have known it before she wrote it down. Claire protects what everyone else assumes will protect itself. She wasn't praising me, she was warning them.